Good afternoon. I'm Linda Baker, the Learning Director at the Center for Research and Education on Violence Against Women and Children. On behalf of the Knowledge Hub team, welcome to our second research briefing, Transformed, Addressing Intimate Partner Violence from Two-Spirit, Non-Binary, and Trans Perspectives. Our presenters will speak for about 10 minutes. Please enter comments or questions for the presenters into slido.com and use the code number 7423, and that will be shown on the slides for your reference. During the last 5 to 10 minutes of our research briefing, I will present some of your questions to our presenters. The link to the presentation slides was emailed to you earlier this morning. I'm honored to introduce our two speakers. Maisha Zarin is the current project coordinator for the Transformed project at MedTrack. Initially starting as a peer leadership group member, Maisha joined on as a project coordinator in 2020. Laura Hartley is the program director at MedTrack Action on Violence. Laura is also a Wendo Women's Self-Defense instructor and a founding member of Girl Justice, a grassroots feminist collective that engages youth in ending gender-based violence. I'm now going to turn over our presentation to Maisha and Laura.
Thank you, Linda.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for having us, and thank you, Linda, for that super nice introduction. We're both really excited to be here and to be able to share with you a preview of the research findings and important implications for service providers that arose from the Transform project. The Transform project is a bilingual community-based research project that is led by MedTrack, Action on Violence, in partnership with Centre de Francophone. So over the past 3 years, the Transform project has been able to engage in community-based participatory research and education with the goal of addressing barriers and increasing access to health and social supports for two-spirit, non-binary, and trans people who have been affected by intimate partner violence.
MedTrack Action on Violence is committed to partnering with individuals, communities, and institutions to change ideas, actions, and policies with the goal of ending gender-based violence. So while MedTrack was historically devoted to advancing safety, justice, and equity for women and youth, with our creation of the Transform project, we've expanded our inclusivity efforts by working collaboratively with community members and multi-sector service providers to research and understand the experiences of intimate partner violence within two-spirit, non-binary, and trans communities. And the Transform project has been generously funded by the Public Health Agency of Canada and the City of Toronto.
So to start off, we want to talk a little bit about our structure and methodology and a little bit about our advisory committee and the PLG, which is our peer leadership group. The Transform project's methodology is unique in its approach. It is a participatory research project that is grounded in centering the experiences and expertise of two-spirit, non-binary, and trans individuals with experiences of IPV. In order to achieve this, the project established a peer leadership group that has been guiding the project since its inception. The group began with 10 members in total, and now currently it consists of 6 community members who are a diverse group of individuals holding many different identities and bringing different life experiences to us.
So in addition to the peer leadership group, we also found it important to work collaboratively with service providers from over 20 organizations who work with two-spirit, non-binary, and trans folks. So these individuals make up our advisory committee, and they have offered both the service provider perspective while also sharing insights that their organizations have gained from working directly with clients from two-spirit, non-binary, and trans communities. So both our advisory committee and peer leadership group have been foundational to the project, and they continue to play a really important role as we move forward in planning for an online symposium, knowledge exchange event series, which we'll talk a little bit more about at the end of the presentation.
Now a little bit about our research project. It began with a thorough environmental scan and literature review. So then we conducted our own research through online surveys, focus groups, and individual key informant interviews. Outreach was conducted to over 125 organizations, and promotional materials were sent in 3 different formats just to make sure there was increased accessibility. So, and overall, over 3,000 people were reached through organic social media engagement and through sponsored advertising. The PLG members provided their experience and expertise and insight to help design the research survey and focus group questions. In the end, we received 136 survey responses. We held 4 focus groups that consisted of 14 people. The focus groups were trans femmes and women of color, trans and non-binary group, newcomer, Francophone Arabic, and the Two-Spirit group. We also had 4 individual interviews with community members and 7 key informant interviews from organizations who work within the GBV sector.
So we would like to acknowledge Eileen Hyman, who is the lead researcher for the online survey. And all of our research activities were informed by an intersectional and trauma-informed approach that prioritized safety and considered the unique needs of gender minority community members, as well as other social and economic identities individuals hold that expose them to intersecting systems of oppression. Our peer leadership members were also trained, and then they were able to support in the coding and analysis of the research.
In terms of key findings, we wanted to share 3 key findings with you today. The first is that over 80% of participants have experienced IPV in their lifetime, while 44% of participants have experienced intimate partner violence in the past 2 years, and 40% of people believed that the violence they experienced was indeed because of their gender identity or expression.
So while we know that experiencing intimate partner violence can have serious and wide-ranging impacts on all aspects of an individual, physically, emotionally, cognitively, financially, spiritually, sexually, with the Transform Project's research, it showed us the specific impacts that intimate partner violence has on individuals within Two-Spirit, non-binary, and trans communities. So on this slide, you can see the 6 most common impacts that survey participants identified as experiencing as a result of intimate partner violence. And we think it's really significant to highlight the fact that 89% of respondents identified experiencing a mental health problem or psychological distress as a result of intimate partner violence. And you can see the other top 5 impacts as well. And not included on this slide, I also just wanted to mention a few other impacts that were identified through the survey, including spiritual or cultural problems, work problems, child welfare involvement, legal issues, and also impact not listed, and folks included suicide, delayed transition, and isolation.
As we previously mentioned, a key aspect of the research was identifying the barriers that Two-Spirit, non-binary, and trans people experience when attempting to access health and social supports for their experiences of violence. The research demonstrated that there are significant barriers that make accessing supports difficult, and one of the main barriers being that 75% of respondents are facing mental health challenges and many different forms of disability that create barriers to accessing these services and supports. And it was also significant for us to mention that 33% of respondents in the study mentioned that resources were not responsive to their specific needs as a Two-Spirit, non-binary, and trans person, and that 31% of participants shared that they had negative experiences using these resources and supports in the past.
So given these research findings, it's really clear that there are significant implications for the provision of health and social service supports for Two-Spirit, non-binary, and trans individuals in order to address the barriers that these communities have identified. So through the research process, Two-Spirit, non-binary, and trans community members, as well as our advisory committee members, shared their suggestions on what changes organizations can make in order to address barriers and provide more inclusive, affirming, and responsive supports. So today, we're just going to briefly mention 2 areas: inclusive language and education.
We saw that many individuals felt that services were not responsive to their needs, and many have had negative experiences with services in the past. One way that organizations and service providers can address this and take steps to create more responsive and affirming services is by familiarizing themselves with the language and terminology that is used within Two-Spirit, non-binary, and trans communities, and ensuring that all service providers respect individuals' names and pronouns. This is a really important step in building rapport and trust with Two-Spirit, non-binary, and trans service users. As a result of this important feedback, we created a transformed glossary which will support your organization, and it includes support and guidance from the PLG. This is really an excellent tool for service providers to use to enhance their understanding of terminology and language that is used within Two-Spirit, non-binary, and trans communities.
So challenging conscious and unconscious biases and discrimination within organizations through ongoing education and training is also essential in order to address attitudinal barriers that Two-Spirit, non-binary, and trans people are facing when they go to seek support. So not only do service providers need more education to uncover and challenge their own internal biases, the research also demonstrated that many Two-Spirit, non-binary, and trans people are not only survivors of violence, but their experience of violence is particular due to their gender and other overlapping identities that they hold. So therefore, service providers need to have both a broad understanding of how systemic forms of oppression impact a particular individual's experiences of violence, while also gaining a specific understanding of the way in which Two-Spirit, non-binary, and trans communities experience violence, and the impacts that that violence has. So this more nuanced understanding of community members' experiences is necessary in order to provide appropriate and responsive services.
So that's the end of our presentation today. Thank you so much for having us. While this was just a very brief preview of some of the research findings and implications of the research for service providers, we really hope that you will participate in our upcoming online symposium event series, which will feature 2 webinars that we developed, as well as panel discussions, opportunities for Q&A, and the release of 4 important health promotion tools and resources that we've created with the guidance and support of our peer leadership group and advisory committee. These resources will support your organization in integrating the vital changes that you need to address barriers and to increase access to affirming supportive services as recommended by Two-Spirit, non-binary, and trans individuals themselves.
So I just invite you to please visit our project website by visiting METRAC's website at metrac.org, and then you can click on the What We Do tab to find the Transform project. And there you can find more information about us, about the PLG and the AC members, and you can stay updated for information about our upcoming symposium and the launch of our resources. Thank you so much to the Knowledge Hub. Thanks for listening, and a really big thank you to our peer leadership group and advisory committee members.
Thank you, Laura and Mayesha. We have so many questions, and we're just going to launch right into them. The first one is about the glossary. I think you just answered part of the question about how to access it. It is available now, I'm assuming.
So we're having actually a big launch of our resources when we host our knowledge exchange and symposium. So that is something to look forward to later this fall. But for now, you can visit the website and you can read a bit more about the 4 tools that we've created, and then you'll find more information about when we're going to be officially launching them to the public.
Okay, thank you. One of the questions about glossaries, language evolves, language changes. So right now you've captured through this amazing methodology the language that's likely to be most helpful. Do you have plans or have you given thought to how to make it a dynamic glossary that will evolve as terminology does?
Yeah, so,
oh,
sorry.
No, you go, Maisha.
Laura, you go ahead and I'll.
No,
okay.
No, go first.
I was just going to say that the drafts of the glossary went through so many revisions, and we really took all the suggestions and advice from our PLG, from the folks that we talked to in our focus groups, through like what we heard through the surveys and through the individual interviews. And we definitely kept in mind that, like you said, language does change and evolve so much. So although that is continuously happening, the version that we have right now is what the community at this current moment feels that it is like would be the best definitions or explanations for certain things. Yeah.
And I would just add that we've also created the document to be hosted online on our transformed webpage, with the understanding that, of course, as we recognize in the glossary, language is continually evolving, and we hope that this project is going to continue to live on, and that there will be, later iterations and developments to the glossary as language continues to change in ways that continue to be representative and affirm the communities that we're working with.
Thank you. Another question, was the research done nationally or mostly in Ontario? And if largely in Ontario, what are the implications in terms of the relevance in other provinces and territories in Canada and beyond?
The research for this project was done specifically in the GTA. So when we were doing outreach or recruiting, it was done like within like the borders of what we would roughly call the GTA right now.
So while the findings are specific to the GTA, I think that there are great implications, nationally and internationally, for the research, in terms of the fact that that there would be similarities in folks' experiences, because folks are talking, specifically about their experience as a two-spirit, non-binary, and trans person. And while like regionally or geographically those experiences might change, especially in terms of like what services or supports are available, I think at least in places that are more like city centers, that there would be a lot of similarities. And I would wager the guess that the experiences of violence would be similar, although the access to services would be different.
One of the questions is related to the definition of intimate partner violence that was used. And in particular, was it the continuum of violence that we associate with intimate partner violence, or was it more physical violence that people reported?
Yeah, so for this project, we kept, I think, I would say a very like broad definition of intimate partner violence, because although people usually associate, the physical aspect of it, we saw that definitely wasn't the case. There were so many reports of like emotional, sexual, spiritual, financial violence. There's so many different components that make up what IPV is. I think it's hardly ever just one thing and not, dipping into like the other sections. And we noticed that through the results that we got from the surveys and from the folks that we were speaking to and heard from.
And just to what Maisha said there, in our webinars and the health promotion tools that we're sharing, you'll be able to see more of the specific discussions around the particular forms of intimate partner violence that two-spirit, non-binary, and trans communities experience, which are unique and are a really important part of what the research in the project uncovered and is bringing to light.
Okay. Just so both of you know, there's also lots of people just clarifying and wanting to know that this presentation will be available later. So we'll just share with them that yes, it'll be available on the website for the Knowledge Hub, but also on MedTrack's website. So you definitely can view it again or for the first time if you weren't able to catch this one. Another question was, in terms of the services that were included in the resources, were they evaluated in any way as to whether they were helpful or appropriate for people seeking support?
Yeah, that's a great question. All the services and supports that we listed were directly recommended to us either by the PLG or people on the advisory committee, or were specifically mentioned as being helpful through the survey or the other interview folks that we spoke to. So we really tried to make sure that they were services that, although they may not be 100% perfect, they're working towards being accessible and available for two-spirit, trans, and non-binary people, and that they were at some point accessed or used by the PLG, so they know that there are certain services or supports available at those locations or organizations that we listed.
Are you open to consulting with Two-Spirit, non-binary, and trans folks from across the territories? I think another
Oh,
question
yeah.
also mentions the Western provinces. So they're looking for you to do this similar kind of work, but in other jurisdictions of Canada.
Yeah, I think open sharing and collaborating was a big part of this entire project. We talked about that all the way through, and even in the creation of some of our resources, such as our webinars, we really spoke in depth about how important it was for this to, keep growing and being passed on and spread to other folks. So, yeah, definitely 100%. I think it's that conversation is continuous and can occur on even bigger scales. So, I think we would be more than happy to share that and like keep working in that way with whoever is interested.
We are at the end of our time. The one thing about these research briefings, they are brief and they're just meant for people to learn about a little bit about your research and to make sure that there's awareness across this large country of what's going on in terms of exciting, innovative trauma and violence-informed research. And I know there have been a lot of people express interest in being kept abreast of your findings. And I was thinking we've had over 500 people register for this research briefing. And maybe we can email when you launch and when things are added to your website, maybe we can email and let people know. Thank you, Laura. Thank you, Maisha. We really appreciate your contribution today.
Thank you so
Yeah,
much
thank you
for
so
having
much.
us.
And we just encourage everybody who participated to look for the link that Sarah will send out to complete the evaluation and to know that there's a certificate of participation that will come your way when you complete the evaluation. Bye for now.